So, since most of the poets we were interested in at that time were Jack Spicer and Robert Duncan and others from during the San Francisco Renaissance. So it became a kind of place for us to basically publish our own work, a kind of, not out of a sense of vanity, but as a sense of community. And that's one of the biggest discoveries I've ever made in the literary life is how writing is not solitary. Writing is a community. Writing involves many others. We were fortunate at the time. We were just starting out. We didn't even have a mailing list. Leroy Jones and Diane DePrima, who edited a magazine in New York City called The Floating Bear, which at that time was a fairly major underground magazine, but they had a mailing list of 200 people. They sent us the mailing list. So we used their mailing list to send out a bunch of our mimeograph magazines, and lo and behold, people responded. Wow! We were talking to people throughout the States and Great Britain and Australia and so forth. So we were getting this feedback, and all of a sudden, poetry became a world. And I've always taken that notion of doing it yourself, putting your hands in it, is one of the most important things of making art, is you have to be in it. And I've always told, my students would always say, well, where can I get published? That's one of the creative writing classes. Where can I get published? That's their big objective. And I just put thumbs down and say, publish yourself. So a lot of my students have started some interesting magazines.
Yeah.
Anyway, Tish became a kind of, gathered some energy, and at that time, Canadian poetry, the 60s, became involved with Coach House Press in Toronto, many of us. These connections started to work out in the States. I went to the States to graduate school and worked with Robert Creeley and Charles Olson. So it just kind of spread out. We all, it was kind of this mushrooming of culture in Canada and the US. At the time, the Vietnam War was this kind of major event for all of us in the late 60s, early 70s. And anyway.
Yeah. Talking of Vietnam, this is a bit of an abstract link here. I was going to ask you about hybridity, the exploration of ethnic hybridity, cultural hybridity, biological hybridity, I suppose. And the Vietnam link for me is because I'm from England. I was sponsored to come here by my wife, who's a daughter of a Vietnamese refugee, and my kids are, half Vietnamese, half English. God knows what else they are, And but I always hope they're going to be able to not be one thing or another. They're going to be Canadian. They're going to be able to explore all those identities. I know it's been a very important theme in your work from day one, as someone of Scots, Irish, Swedish, Chinese, all those many different backgrounds. So I was going to ask you about that. Exploring that hybridity in your work, particularly in the 60s and 70s when it must have been less usual and less accepted, maybe, I don't know.
Well, the whole notion of race wasn't, I don't think the word race was part of the discourse in Canada that I knew of in the 60s and 70s. It didn't really come into Canadian consciousness, I don't think, until sometime during the 70s. Joy Kogawa's Obasan was published in 1982. The Japanese-Canadian redress movement started, I think, in 1979 or 80. It first happened for me in, I think, grade 3, and in those days, in the 50s, in British Columbia, every year you were given a form to fill out at school.
You had to tick one box.
And I didn't know I was. I didn't know I was Chinese. I thought I was just like everyone else. And so as soon as that happened in the school, I became, of course, a chink. And I got placed in a certain racial category, which in Canada, I think in the 60s, became a kind of part of a class awareness, a class consciousness. I mean, in our school, there are a lot of Italians, Doukhobors, a great Doukhobor population, Irish, Portuguese, and we had one Chinese family at the time. But it was a mix, and I kind of grew up with that expectation that the world was mixed, except that I soon realized that those of us who are seen as different are treated differently. So, and that has, in fact, goes on to this day. The recent coach of the Calgary Flames can tell you.
Yeah, wonderful.
But being